Today, the Arab peoples and their culture are primarily associated with Islam, the last of the world's religions to emerge. However, the Arabs themselves existed long before the advent of Islam. In those ancient times, their territory was limited to the Arabian Peninsula, and Syrians, Palestinians, Egyptians, Libyans and other peoples who are now part of the Arab ethnos have not yet joined it and spoke their own, although related to Arabic, languages. Since Islam originated as a religious system in the Arab society, there are many Arab elements in the general culture of the Islamic world, but the ancient Arab culture, in turn, has also undergone profound changes under the influence of Islam. Nowadays, we can draw basic information about how the Arabs lived in the pre-Islamic period from ancient Roman and Byzantine written sources and early Islamic literature telling about the life of the first Muslims who began to practice their religion surrounded by pagan Arabs. The developed powers of late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. The Roman and Byzantine empires, Sasanian Iran, perceived Arabia, entirely covered with sultry arid deserts, as a semi-wild and poor land. Its population was usually represented by the Romans, Byzantines and Iranians as free nomads driving flocks of sheep and camels across the endless sands. In fact, the Arabs, nomadic Bedouins, made up a smaller part of the population of the Arabian Peninsula, simply due to the fact that they needed wide lands in the desert region to graze cattle. They settled in rare camps on most of its territory. But most of the Arabs led a sedentary lifestyle, rather densely inhabiting oases and valleys of drying rivers wadis, where there were wells that supplied them with water. The settled Arabs were engaged in cattle breeding on desolate pastures and farming on more moistened areas in the valleys. They planted gardens in which they grew mostly date palm resistant to prolonged drought. The Bedouins lived in portable tents, the settled Arabs lived in adobe houses. Cities could be surrounded by stone walls. The Arabs were famous as fearless and cruel warriors. The ancient Romans often hired them to serve in their troops. A case is described when a mounted detachment of Arabs in Roman service attacked a German army on foot. The Germans, like all the barbarians of Europe who know how to repel mounted attacks well, held on for a long time and stubbornly, not letting the Arab horsemen to a sufficient distance to move to hand combat. However, in the end, one of the Arab warriors managed to defeat the German. Triumphantly, the Arab jumped off his horse, put his lips to the bleeding wound on the body of the defeated opponent, and began to suck the blood, and then threw back his head and let out a loud howl like a wolf. The Germans, seeing such a picture, decided that they had a werewolf in front of them and fled in horror. Neither the Romans or the Byzantines nor the Persians could conquer Arabia itself, and probably did not want to. For the most part, the lifeless hot sands, deep into which the army of no power could pass without reliable guides, did not attract rich empires. Only in the south of the Arabian Peninsula in the area called Yemen, there was an ancient state, not to be confused with the modern state of Yemen in the same area, with quite rich trading cities. However, he was separated from the Roman Empire, Byzantium and Iran, by thousands of kilometers of arid desert Nejd, which served as his natural protection from the warlike aspirations of the emperors. Rare cities founded by merchants were also located in the mountain valleys of the western part of the peninsula, where there were more oases and wells. Arab merchants traded camel wool, dates, oil, which they bought from farmers and cattle breeders, and carried camel caravans to the north to the possessions of empires, where they resold profitably. Of merchants and military leaders in Arab cities by the beginning of the V.Th. There was a tribal nobility that stood at the head of the tribes. The Arab ethnos was not consolidated, each tribe of which it consisted was governed according to its own customs and built relations with other tribes at its discretion. And the Arabs themselves, first of all, referred themselves to their tribe and then to the Arabs in general. The tribe usually traced its roots to some one ancestor, and all the Arabs to the ancient prophet Ismail, Ishmael. The tribe was divided into clans, also descended from one ancestor. At the head of the clans were elders sheikhs. At the head of the entire tribe was the leader emir, who was also a military leader. The harshness of natural conditions, the absence of an orderly unified government, led to the spread of robbery and predatory wars, when poorer clans and tribes tried to profit by plundering the richer. Therefore, military training occupied an important place in the life of the Arabs. Arab boys were trained in the art of war from childhood. Every man was a warrior, certainly owned a weapon. The main weapons were long swords, spears, bows and arrows. The Arabs fought both on horseback, on horses and camels, and on foot. In combat, a shield was often used against enemy strikes. A difficult and anxious life forced society to appreciate members capable of working and fighting, to rejoice at the birth of boys. In the upbringing of children, the Arabs closely combined sometimes immense love and affection with strict discipline and subordination. At the same time, infanticide was widespread in pre-Islamic Arabia. During the famine years, newborn girls, as less useful to society than boys, were buried alive in the ground. In general, a woman in a deeply patriarchal ancient Arab society had almost no rights. If a boy was born in the family, a big holiday was arranged. If a girl was born, the family held mourning rituals. Rich people sometimes had entire harems of dozens of wives. Some husbands forced their wives into prostitution and supported their families with the proceeds. The women ate separately from the men. Of course, not every Arab treated women as despicable creatures, and some noble, intelligent and determined women could even have a significant influence in society, but in general, the attitude towards the weaker sex was dominated by arrogant, consumerist. Already preaching Islam, the Prophet Muhammad in the Vi'ith. He specifically pointed out that for the murder of a woman, the criminal is also subject to execution. The primitive patriarchal way of life of the ancient Arabs was expressed not only in the perception of woman as a secondary member of society, but above all in a clear intranatal subordination. The head of the family had full power over all the household members, the tribal elders over all other members of the family. The sale of children by parents, the exchange of people between births were practiced. In the early Middle Ages, patriarchal slavery was widespread. Slaves were in the position of the younger members of the family, but after the death of its head, they did not become free, but were distributed among the heirs. It happened that a clan, not wanting to lose its member who killed someone from another clan, according to the custom of blood feud, killed one of its slaves under a contract with blood relatives. And a free representative of the genus remained alive, and a couple of workers on the principle of retribution became less. The clothes of the Arabs in ancient times were similar to the clothes of modern Bedouin Arabs, but due to the antiquity of time, they also had certain differences. The undergarment was a kind of long loincloth. Among rich people, the eyes reached a length of up to the feet and even to the ground. A long and wide shirt was worn on the torso. Wide folds of clothing in the heat characteristic of the Arabian deserts contributed to maintaining an optimal temperature between the body and the fabric. For additional protection from the heat while moving through the desert and from the night cold peculiar to deserts, a wide robe was worn on top. The Arabs tied their heads with a turban that protected them from sunlight, overheating and absorbed sweat, preventing it from spreading over the face and causing inconvenience. Women also wore spacious long capes called arba. The Arabs wore sandals on their feet, hard soles with straps that protected their feet from burns when moving on the sun-baked sand. Arabic belongs to the Semitic group of the Afrasian family of languages. The languages of the Afrasian family are grammatically constructed in many ways similar to the languages of the Indo-European family. There are prepositions, genitive and accusative endings, but they also have their own important features. For example, word formation is carried out not by adding prefixes or suffixes, not by adding words, but by changing vowels in a word. For example, kataba in Arabic means to write, hence katib writer, kitab book. The Arabs had their own written language, preserved almost unchanged to our time, with some changes borrowed during the era of the Arab caliphate by other peoples professing Islam. By the beginning of Vibe, a significant cultural upsurge has begun in the Arab environment. Versification was held in high esteem. The most famous poet of pre-Islamic Arabia is Majnun. Religiously, the vast majority of Arabs adhered to pagan beliefs. Their religious beliefs were based on the cult of the same God, the creator of the universe, as in Judaism and Christianity. The Arabs called him Allah from an ancient Semitic word meaning God, deity. Some ancient Jewish texts also call God by a similar name Mellah. However, if the Jews and Christians worshipped God as one, then the pagan Arabs believed that besides God Allah, there were a number of minor gods whom they worshipped along with Allah. The Arabs depicted other gods in the form of idols, which they placed in sanctuaries and conducted religious rites around them. The Arabs sacrificed cattle to their gods, and sometimes human sacrifices were practiced. For example, there was a custom of sacrificing the first male child born in the family. Unlike Jews and Christians, pagan Arabs did not believe in life after death, and therefore in posthumous punishment for sins during life. Therefore, in the ancient Arab environment, it was common to live, as they say, to the fullest, with riotous celebrations and libations, male sexual freedom inherited from primitive times, predatory attacks on the territory of neighboring tribes. Many customs of the ancient Arabs look, from our point of view, depraved. For example, women performed some religious rites in the nude. The religious center of all pagan Arabs was the cube-shaped Kaaba temple, built by the prophets Ismail and his father Abraham, located in the city of Mecca in western Arabia. People from all over Arabia periodically made hajj pilgrimages to the Kaaba. A man holding onto the wall of the Kaaba could not be killed. Regular pilgrimage to the Kaaba, accompanied by sacrifices to numerous gods and offerings to the servants of their cult, brought a very large income to the Quraysh tribe living in Mecca and its environs, which in fact was the most influential of the Arab tribes. However, in addition to adherents of pagan beliefs, there were Jews and Christians among the Arabs, who in some places inhabited entire cities. There were also Hanifs, people who believed in only one God, Allah, and denied the existence of other gods, but at the same time did not follow either the Jewish or Christian religion. In addition to deities, the Arabs believed in various beings invisible to the ordinary human eye. In particular, like adherents of monotheistic religions, they believed in the servants of Allah, angels, in Arabic, malak, with supernatural power. The environment. deserts, mountains, valleys, human habitation, was inhabited by fire spirits jinn, capable of taking on different forms. Jinn were considered capable of both helping people and harming them. Some spirits were endowed with great strength and danger to people, for example, ghouls, man-eating monsters, according to the ideas of the ancient Arabs, who were found in the desert. The Arabs called the spirits hostile to people shaitans, from the ancient Semitic word meaning enemy. The same origin has the word Satan, that passed from Hebrew into Greek. In vibe. In Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad began to preach Islam, which in the very near future was destined to become the second in the number of adherents of the world religions. The new religion, which provides for faith in only one God and strict observance of the laws given to people by God, faith in life after death and posthumous retribution by heaven or hell for good deeds and sins, in a matter of decades spread first in western Arabia and then throughout the Arabian Peninsula, began to spread beyond its borders in Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Iraq, which then belonged to the Byzantine and Sasanian empires. Islam irreconcilably fought against pagan beliefs until their complete eradication. In addition, he brought a system of new values to Arab society. Strictness of morals prevailed everywhere, and for centuries Arab tribes living separately on the basis of one religion, united under the rule of first Muhammad, then his successors, the caliphs. All this happened with such rapidity at that time that in Byzantium and Iran, they did not notice in time how a new state, a caliphate, strong in its cohesion and devotion of the subjects of its religion, arose next to these two ancient empires on the side of the semi-wild deserts of Arabia. The invasion of the caliphate's troops into the lands of Syria, Palestine and Iraq, belonging to Byzantium and Iran, where many Muslims also appeared among the local population who wanted to see the caliph, not the emperor, as their ruler, in many ways came as a surprise to these powers. Under the banner of Islam, the Arabs recaptured half of the territories belonging to Byzantium with dizzying speed and crushed the age-old pillar of the East, the Iranian Sassanid Empire, conquering all its territories, turning Iran into one of the provinces of the new religious empire. And then, having replenished the battle ranks with other peoples who adopted Islam, they continued their conquests further to the east and west, creating a huge power that went down in history under the name of the Arab Caliphate. The territory on which Islam has firmly strengthened up to our time, Islamic spiritual values and culture have spread. However, the Muslims, expanding the borders of their state, actively borrowed the cultural and technical achievements of the peoples who submitted to the Caliph, including the Persians and Byzantines. In turn, as already mentioned, Islam abolished many ancient Arab customs and elements of culture. Therefore, Islamic culture carries only a part, and a relatively modest part, of the culture of ancient Arabia.